All right, guys, so today we're going to talk about why thoracic mobility, rotation, and extension is important in quarterbacks. Thoracic mobility is something that we measure from an extension standpoint, but as well as a rotational standpoint in all of our athletes. We train a variety of athletes from MLB to NFL to high school, middle school, but thoracic mobility is something that we measure in all our athletes and all our population. And we have a pretty detailed and in-depth assessment that we put our athletes through. It's a pretty heavy process, if you will, but it's important to have a baseline and a foundation to see what our athletes' needs are, and two, how we can help our athletes get to where they need to be, and how we can improve their function and keep them healthy. Right. So that's one of the biggest processes and the biggest reasons why we have such an in-depth assessment here. But let's talk about thoracic mobility and why it's important with the quarterback position, and why it's important in any rotational athlete and any overhead athlete. But a quarterback being an overhead and a rotational athlete, we need both rotation and extension. So in one quick second, we're going to look at where the thoracic spine is. We have a general understanding where the thoracic spine is, and then we're going to look at at several reasons why the mobility needs to come from the thoracic joint and not the lumbar or any other joint when you're rotating, right? Of course, the hips are going to be involved, but from the upper torso region, if we're just talking about the spine, the thoracic region is where we want our mobility to come from as it relates to rotation and extension. A lot of times when someone lacks thoracic mobility, which is the midsection, we're going to have a lot of unwanted shear force on the lumbar spine, which over time is going to lead to what we call macro trauma. But a lot of times micro trauma, meaning a little bit of irritation or inflammation, is going to make up that macro trauma, and at some point it's going to cause unwanted results on the field. And so from our point of view, we're not quarterback coaches, and we're not skill coaches, but we are over everything in the strength conditioning side of things in the weight room. So it's up to us to help foster that mobility in the weight room and training and treatment, so that when they're on the field, they are able to perform at their most optimal level and not have any resistance or any unwanted lack of mobility because of what they're doing in the weight room. We want to make sure that everything we're doing is fostering what they're going to be doing on the field. So without that, with all that kind of mumbo jumbo out of the way, let's go ahead and look at the thoracic spine. Let's talk about a joint by joint approach where the joints are stacked on mobility joint, stability joint, and we'll see how they kind of work together. We're going to look at a few examples from NFL quarterbacks and games, and why that thoracic rotation is important, and how it can decrease injury. And then after that, I'm going to show you just a basic screen of how you can see, okay, do I have thoracic rotation? Do I lack it? Do I need to gain it? Do I need to foster it? Do I need to maintain it? Whatever it may be, we're going to look at a few screens, and I'm going to show just two very basic mobility corrective exercises, if you will, that some people like the term, that can help gain rotation and gain extension. Again, there are several reasons why people lack thoracic rotation, whether it's a stiff lat, whether it's improper alignment of the scap, a stiff pec. We're not going to get into all those reasons because the video would be extremely long. It's probably already going to be longer than I want it to be. But let's go ahead and just dive right into it and take a breakdown of why thoracic mobility in general is important for quarterbacks. So this quick basic anatomy lesson, anatomy 101, if you will, just to go over what joint, what region we're actually going to be talking about. So we're going to be talking about the thoracic region, the thoracic part of our spine, which is this kind of blue. There's my highlight. Nope. So this like bluish purple part of the spine of the vertebrae, which is consisted of, bony processes, and whether we have our transverse processes, which are on the outside, spinous processes, which are down the middle. A lot of different bony action and joints going on through here. We got 24 essential vertebrae. We usually don't count the sacrum and the coccyx with test 5 and 4 because they're all fused together. As opposed to the traditional 24 vertebrae, they are all able to move, if you will. But we want the majority of the movement to come from the thoracic region. You can see it kind of goes hand in hand with our rib cage. The first 7 are the cervical spine. The last 5 are lumbar spine, which is where a lot of lower back injuries, the majority happen, particularly between L4 and L5, or even L5 and S1 right here. And so whenever we don't have a lot of mobility, or whenever we lack movement in this region for whatever reason, whether it's because of stiff lats, stiff pec, scaps off place, thoracic rounding, whatever it may be, then we have to have movement from some place. So if there's no movement coming from the thoracic region, we have to have movement from the lumbar region, which is not made to move. It's made to be a stability joint. And then, of course, the cervical spine will follow as well. So typically, we see in a lot of rotational athletes, if this is stiff and not loose and not mobile and able to move like it's supposed to, then the movement's going to come from down here, and we get some lower back issues. And especially in today's quarterback game, in today's age, when you are throwing nonstop from your season through year-round 7-on-7 to your quarterback coach that you probably seen at least once a week. There's a lot of throwing going involved, so we want to make sure that this region is taken care of. Otherwise, the movement has to come from somewhere else, and you might not feel it your first session, your first year throwing, but years down the road, if your movement and the rotation keeps coming from down here in the lumbar region, the lumbar spine, we're going to have some unfavorable and suboptimal results. So I don't want to talk too much about that on this slide, but just so we know where the thoracic region is, it's these 12 vertebrae right through here. So this article is an old article created by Mike Boyle, a very well-respected strength coach in the strength conditioning field, as well as Greg Cook was kind of involved in this process as well, and he was big in the FMS, which is the functional movement screen, which a lot of practitioners have used in the past and have their own kind of spin-off on it that they use. But this kind of goes off, now that we know where the thoracic joint is, now that we know the basic anatomy of the thoracic joint and kind of what it's made up of, we can go on to this chart that they talk about in this joint by joint approach article, which we mentioned earlier. You can see right here, each joint has a specific training needs, and this table below, which we'll look at in a second, goes that the table of the body has that joint by joint basis from bottom up. So if we scroll down a little bit, we can see what they're talking about, where we start with a mobility joint and go into a stability joint, and alternate back and forth, back and forth. They're all stacked on top of each other. And what we're going to be focusing on is the T-spine. We call it the thoracic joint, and it's stuck in between two stability joints. So we need to get mobility from there so the lumbar spine and the glenohumeral joint, which is the shoulder joint, can have proper function. So this was just a quick article I wanted to go over and show briefly so we can kind of understand, the joints that stack on top of each other. Mobility, stability, mobility, stability, mobility, stability. And this is a more of a simplified approach. Of course, is more complex thoughts and more complex ideas to go on with training. This gives you a good mindset and kind of just a good broad picture of a joint by joint approach and how we are going to attack the thoracic spine and why it's important for our overhead athletes, and in this case, quarterbacks. So here's an example of why we need thoracic mobility, especially thoracic rotation. Thoracic rotation and extension kind of go hand in hand with most things, and especially shoulder flexion and rotation, though. And so this is a absolute bomb here, but it shows, yes, Michael Vick had great thoracic rotation. He was able to rotate, and he had a long runway where the force he produced had a chance to decelerate appropriately, as opposed to those forces going to unwanted joints, whether it may be the low back or the hip potentially. And so let's go ahead and watch this play, but we're going to see the amount of force he produces, but then the amount of thoracic rotation and mobility that he does have. And so I think the end zone angle is going to be a little bit better, but we can still see here it's absolute bomb from the 5-yard line all the way to the other 35. What a throw. And then I think whenever let's see if we get it back. Let's get an end zone angle right here. Watch. It's about to throw. Oh my gosh, that's unbelievable. So watch, he's already rotating, but watch, he needs a long runway, right? That's why it's important to have thoracic mobility. He needs a runway to soften the blow, if you will, to absorb the force, if you will, for the force to continue to go through so it doesn't go to the low back. So we want that upper torso rotating. Let's go ahead and continue the play. Boom. So we all remember the that hip warm-up drill that Dak Prescott was doing a few years ago on TV, and kind of became a social media sensation, if you will. But it's a drill that a lot of rotational athletes have been practicing. A lot of our pitchers and quarterbacks have been doing for several years now. Now you've seen more quarterbacks doing it as like a pregame routine, or just kind of like a central nervous system primer to get them in a good position. But you're going to see the importance of the thoracic mobility here, and having thoracic rotation is so you have that hip and shoulder separation. So we have I can't draw on here, not very technically sound, but there you go, hip shoulder separation. So that's why let me pause it, boom. So we're moving from the thoracic region here, and the hips are moving forward as the thoracic region is moving backwards, creating that hip and shoulder separation. And so the more thoracic mobility that we have, the more separation in theory we can get, and then the longer runway we're going to have when we throw and deliver a ball. So just another example of why thoracic rotation is important, and thought I would just use this example to get a clearer picture and break it down here besides besides a game example. Boom, right there. Boom. So here's a quick screen, and it's one of our assessment processes for thoracic mobility. We're going to put a PVC pipe or some type of small bar on top of our back. I'm going to rotate towards the leg that's up. We want to have at least 60 degrees of thoracic rotation, and we have ways that we measure that. You see I lack thoracic rotation here. I definitely need to work on it. And so again, put the front leg up. Going to slightly rotate. If you lack 60 degrees of thoracic rotation, you probably need some mobility work. So let's go ahead and look at a few exercises that can help with that mobility work. So this little corrective exercise, mobility exercise, whatever you want to call it, we call it 90-90 stretch. Okay, so this is going to help foster thoracic rotation. There's several different exercises and various different ways to kind of gain that rotation or improve the rotation. But this is one of our basic exercises that I'm just going to show here. So 90-90 meaning we have 90 degrees of hip flexion, we have 90 degrees of knee flexion here, okay? And so we're going to keep this top leg stacked on the bottom leg with this, in this case, my right knee is slightly in front of my left knee. That's going to kind of help keep my low back in place, so rotation is strictly coming from my thoracic region. I'm going to get as long as I can this way and as long as I can this way. So we're going to go ahead and start the video. You see I'm going. I'm going to inhale and exhale and try to gain more range of motion. Then I'm going to get as long as I can here, then come back. And you want to really focus on, let's pause it here. You want to make sure the elbow does not go below the shoulder line. Then we're going to kind of have unwanted stress on the anterior joint capsule of the shoulder, and that we call that anterior humeral glide, meaning the humerus is gliding forward. We want to make sure we're moving from the scap and trying to get the scap to touch the bottom of the ground. Obviously, I lack this. We want the scap to touch the bottom of the ground without the elbow going first, right? So that the elbow is never going to get below the shoulder joint. Then we'll come back. That's it. So this next clip is going to help with thoracic extension, just meaning how far kind of backwards you can move from your thoracic region, which is very important to help keep proper shoulder flexion mobility, which is just the range of motion that your shoulder can move overhead that's coming from your glenohumeral joint. And so that, of course, is extremely important for a lot of various reasons that we can't get into on this show or in this video, if you will. But for this exercise, we're going to place the foam roller on the bottom of your scap, which is going to be, usually we want to be the 7th vertebrae of your thoracic region. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and play this. And then I'm going to hold my head here, keep my chin tucked close to my clavicle, and then I'm going to try to move just from here, right? Just from this thoracic region. I don't want to move from my lower back here. I want to make sure that extension is coming from my thoracic region. Watch it go back. Exhale to gain more range of motion. Good. You can see my lats stretching as well. Let's go ahead and do one more rep here. You'll see. Inhale when you get to the bottom, exhale for more range of motion. These last two clips are going to be if I'm doing it incorrectly, and we're going to see me moving from the lower back, my neck moving as well, not coming from my thoracic region. So just to recap, we talked about why thoracic rotation and extension is important, why we need that as a quarterback, any overhead athlete, but we're talking strictly about quarterbacks right now. We talked about why it's important. We talked about that joint by joint approach where some joints need stability, some joints need mobility, especially in an athlete that's throwing as their main use of athleticism, being the quarterback. And then we saw several examples of why we need that runway, why we need to be able to absorb force, and why this needs to be able to absorb force, not our low back. And then we saw a few different exercises. Okay, how we can foster and gain mobility through the thoracic region, and we saw like a basic screen, and again very broad and not a ton of depth there, but I just wanted to show I tried to get a bunch of kind of content and information in a small amount of time. Again, I went longer than I wanted to, but if you have any questions about thoracic mobility or thoracic region, or you want to talk more about it, please hit the comments below. I'm going to link in our website that you can follow and reach out to us on. But if you like this video, please like it. If you enjoyed this type of quarterback content, please subscribe to it. We will put out more kind of educational side of things from the quarterback position and what we look for. And if you're interested in seeing more of the screening process, the assessment process, please let us know as well, and we'll put up more stuff because each joint has a role that plays in throwing the football. And so we are more than happy to talk about the role in each of those joints. So again, if you like this video, please give us a like, give us a comment, give us a subscription, I guess, if you like this type of stuff, and we'll put up more kind of quarterback training as far as how it goes in the weight room related content. Thank you.